You have 30 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't let you die alone in this hospital bed. The voice cut through my morphine haze like ice water. I forced my eyes open, expecting to see another overworked nurse, or maybe Dr. Patterson with more bad news about my kidney failure. Instead, three strangers in expensive suits stood at the foot of my bed. The woman speaking had steel gray eyes and perfectly styled black hair. Something about her face seemed familiar, but I couldn't place it. "I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong room," I whispered, my throat raw from the breathing tube they'd removed that morning. "Room 314. Margaret Park. 58 years old. Stage 4 kidney disease. No family listed. No emergency contacts." The man to her left read from a tablet, his voice clinical but somehow gentle. "Sound right to you?" The third person, a younger man with kind eyes, stepped closer. "Hello, Maggie." That's when my heart stopped. Nobody had called me Maggie in 20 years. Nobody except. I've been thinking a lot about karma lately, especially lying here in this hospital bed with nothing but time and the steady beep of machines keeping me company. How are you all doing out there? I hope wherever you're watching this from, you're somewhere warm and safe. The weather here in Portland has been nothing but rain for weeks, which seems fitting somehow. People always say what goes around comes around, but I never expected it to circle back quite like this. Sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of timing. Sometimes the very thing you think destroyed your life turns out to be the only thing that can save it. My name is Margaret Park, but everyone used to call me Maggie. This is the story of how I went from being a woman who lost everything trying to save 3 broken children to lying in a hospital bed 20 years later, watching those same children walk back into my life as the most powerful people I'd ever seen. But before I tell you about that moment when my past and present collided in ways I never could have imagined, let me ask you something. Have you ever made a decision that you knew would cost you everything, but you made it anyway because it was right? Have you ever loved someone so completely that you'd sacrifice your own future for theirs, even knowing they might never understand what you gave up? If you have, then you'll understand why I opened my door that night in 2004. If you haven't, well, maybe this story will help you recognize that moment when it comes for you. I need you to do me a favor, though. If this story moves you, if it makes you think about the people who shaped your life or the chances you have to shape someone else's, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And stick around until the end, because what those 3 people revealed in my hospital room that day changed everything I thought I knew about love, sacrifice, and the invisible threads that connect our lives in ways we never see coming. But let me start from the beginning, back when I was 38 years old and still believed that doing the right thing would somehow work out in the end. I was a pediatric nurse at Oregon Health Sciences University, working the night shift because it paid better and because I genuinely loved taking care of sick children when their parents couldn't be there. I had this little house in southeast Portland, nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom bungalow with a garden I was proud of and a mortgage I could barely afford on a nurse's salary. I believed in a lot of things back then. I believed that hard work would eventually pay off. I believed that if you were kind to people, they'd be kind back. I believed that children deserved safety and love, no matter where they came from or what their circumstances were. I believed that family was something you chose, not just something you were born into. Most of all, I believed that when life put someone in your path who needed help, you helped them. Period. No questions asked, no conditions attached, no expectations of getting anything in return. I was so naive. It was October 15th, 2004, and I was just getting home from a particularly brutal 12-hour shift. We'd lost a 7-year-old to leukemia that night, and I was emotionally drained in that way that only happens when you watch a child slip away despite everything modern medicine can do. I was fumbling with my keys in the dark when I heard it. Crying. Soft, muffled, but definitely crying. I looked around and saw them huddled together on my front porch. Three kids, maybe 8, 10, and 12 years old, dirty and thin and holding on to each other like they were afraid someone would tear them apart. The oldest, a girl with tangled dark hair, was trying to shush the youngest, a little boy who couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. "Hey," I said softly, the way I talked to scared kids at the hospital. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" The girl looked up at me with eyes that had seen too much. "We're sorry. We'll move. We were just trying to stay dry." It had been raining for 3 days straight, that cold October rain that soaks through everything. Their clothes were damp, and I could see them shivering. "How long have you been out here?" "Just tonight," she said quickly. Too quickly. The middle child, a boy with serious dark eyes, spoke up. "Lila, tell her the truth." 3 days, the girl admitted. "Maybe 4. We've been moving around." "Where are your parents?" The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. "What are your names?" "I'm Lila. This is Andrew, and that's Danny." She pointed to her brothers. "We're not supposed to talk to strangers, but you seem nice. And you're a nurse, right? I can tell from your scrubs." I should have called Child Protective Services right then. That's what any reasonable person would have done. These kids needed to be in the system, needed proper placement, needed people trained to handle whatever trauma had put them on the streets. Instead, I unlocked my front door. "Come inside. Let's get you warm and fed, and then we'll figure out what to do next." That decision, made in 30 seconds on a rainy October night, would change the entire trajectory of my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. It would cost me my relationship with my boyfriend Alex, who couldn't understand why I'd taken 3 random kids with no paperwork and no background checks. It would drain my savings account and max out my credit cards. It would end my dreams of traveling, of maybe going back to school, of having any kind of easy or predictable life. But in that moment, looking at 3 scared children who had nowhere else to go, none of that mattered. All that mattered was getting them inside where it was warm and safe. I had no idea that 20 years later, those same 3 children would be the only thing standing between me and death. The first thing I learned about Lila, Andrew, and Danny was that they were survivors in ways that broke my heart. While they sat at my kitchen table wrapped in every blanket I owned, slowly eating bowls of soup I'd heated up, their story came out in careful, measured pieces. They'd been living with their grandmother after their parents died in a car accident 2 years earlier. No other family, no relatives who wanted 3 grieving kids. Their grandmother had done her best, but when she passed away 6 months ago, there was no will, no legal guardianship papers, nothing to prove these children even existed in any official capacity. "Grandma always said the government would just split us up," Lila explained, her voice steady, but her hands shaking as she held her spoon. "She made us promise we'd stay together no matter what." "We've been staying in different places," Andrew added. He was 10, but he talked like someone much older. "Abandoned houses, under bridges. Sometimes people would let us sleep in their garage for a night or 2. Danny, the youngest at 8, hadn't said much, but he stayed pressed against Lila's side like he was afraid she might disappear. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Are you going to make us leave?" I looked at these 3 kids who had been taking care of each other for months, who had somehow managed to stay together against impossible odds, and I made another decision that would reshape my entire world. "You can stay here tonight. We'll figure out tomorrow when tomorrow comes." That night turned into a week. The week turned into a month. And somewhere in there, without any official paperwork or legal proceedings, I became the guardian of 3 children who technically didn't exist. Alex was the first casualty of my choice. We'd been together for 2 years, talking about marriage, about buying a house together, about the future we were building. He was a good man, a financial advisor who understood planning and stability and the importance of doing things the right way. "Maggie, you can't just keep 3 random kids," he said during what would be our last real conversation. "You don't know anything about them. You don't know what kind of trauma they've been through, what problems they might have. And legally, this is a nightmare waiting to happen. They're not random kids, Alex. They're Lila, Andrew, and Danny. They're smart and kind and they've been through hell, but they're good kids. That's not the point. The point is you're throwing away your life for children who aren't your responsibility. What about us? What about our plans? I looked at him sitting in my living room, where Danny was quietly doing homework at the coffee table while Andrew helped Lila with her math at the kitchen table, and I realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. They are my responsibility now. And if you can't understand that, then maybe we don't have the same values after all. He left that night and never came back. 3 weeks later, I got a text message saying he'd started dating someone from his office. Someone who wanted the same things he wanted. Someone who wouldn't complicate his life with other people's problems. The financial reality hit next. 3 kids meant 3 times the grocery bill, 3 times the clothing costs, 3 sets of school supplies and fees, and all the hidden expenses that come with children. My modest nurse's salary, which had been enough for one person living simply, was suddenly stretched impossibly thin. I picked up extra shifts whenever I could, working doubles and covering for other nurses who called in sick. I sold my car and bought an older, cheaper one. I canceled my cable, my gym membership, my subscription to the medical journals I loved reading. I stopped buying coffee on my way to work and started making sandwiches instead of buying lunch in the hospital cafeteria. But the kids were thriving. That was the thing that made every sacrifice worth it. Lila, who had been carrying the weight of keeping her brothers safe for months, slowly started acting like the 12-year-old she was. She joined the school choir and discovered she had a beautiful voice. Andrew threw himself into his studies with an intensity that amazed his teachers. And Danny, sweet Danny, started smiling again. They were brilliant, all 3 of them. Not just smart, but emotionally intelligent in ways that constantly surprised me. They helped with household chores without being asked. They did their homework diligently. They were kind to each other and to me in ways that felt almost too good to be true. "Why are you doing this for us?" Lila asked me one night as I was tucking her into the bed I'd set up in what used to be my home office. "Because you needed help, and I was able to help. But you don't even know us. We could be bad kids. We could cause you problems." I sat on the edge of her bed and brushed her hair back from her face. "Lila, in the 6 weeks you've been here, you've helped Danny with his nightmares, you've tutored Andrew in reading, you've cooked dinner for all of us twice when I had to work late, and you've never once complained about sharing a room or wearing secondhand clothes or any of the ways your life has been turned upside down. If that's what bad kids look like, then I'll take bad kids any day." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Our grandmother used to say that angels don't always have wings. Sometimes they just have kind hearts and open doors." That's when I knew I was in trouble. Not because the kids were difficult or demanding, but because I was falling in love with them. They were becoming my family in ways I hadn't expected, and the thought of losing them was starting to terrify me. The first real betrayal came from my own sister, Jennifer. She'd been supportive at first, even admiring what she called my generous spirit. But as months passed and it became clear this wasn't a temporary arrangement, her attitude shifted. "Maggie, this is getting ridiculous," she said during one of our weekly phone calls. "You're 38 years old. You should be thinking about your own future, your own family. These kids are going to drain you dry, and then what? You'll be 50 with nothing to show for it except 3 teenagers who'll probably leave the minute they turn 18 anyway." "They're not draining me, Jen. They're my family now. They're not your family. They're charity cases. And charity is supposed to be temporary, not a life sentence." The words stung because part of me wondered if she was right. Was I being naive? Was I sacrificing my own future for children who would eventually move on with their lives and forget about the woman who took them in? But then Andrew would show me a story he'd written, or Danny would crawl into my lap while we watched movies on Friday nights, Or Lila would hug me goodnight and whisper, "I love you, Maggie," and all my doubts would disappear. The second betrayal came from the school system. Despite my best efforts to enroll them properly, the lack of official documentation created constant problems. Social workers started asking questions. Teachers wanted to know why there were no emergency contacts besides me, no medical records, no previous school transcripts. "Miss Park," the principal called me in to discuss. "We need to talk about the legal status of these children. If they're not officially in your custody, we have liability issues. And frankly, we're required to report situations like this to Child Protective Services." My blood ran cold. These children are safe and loved and thriving. They're not being harmed. I understand that, and I can see they're doing well academically and socially. But the law is the law. Without proper guardianship papers, we can't continue to enroll them here. That night, I sat the kids down and tried to explain the situation as gently as possible. We might need to make their living situation official, which could mean court proceedings, background checks, home visits from social workers. "Will they split us up?" Danny asked, his eyes wide with fear. "I won't let that happen, I promised, though I had no idea how I could keep that promise." "What if they say you're not good enough to keep us?" Andrew asked quietly. The question hit me like a physical blow because it was the same fear that kept me awake at night. What if the system decided that a single nurse with no experience raising children wasn't suitable? What if they determined that these kids would be better off in foster care or group homes? "Then we'll fight it," I said with more confidence than I felt. "We're a family now, and families stick together." But even as I said the words, I could feel the walls closing in. The financial strain was getting worse. My credit cards were maxed out. I'd borrowed money from my retirement account to cover Danny's emergency room visit when he broke his arm falling off his bike. My own health was suffering from the stress and the extra shifts I was working. And now the legal system was threatening to tear apart the only family I'd ever really wanted. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by bills I couldn't pay and legal documents I couldn't understand, and I wondered if Jennifer had been right. Was I destroying my own life for children who might be taken away from me anyway? But then I heard Danny crying out from a nightmare, and I went to comfort him the way I had dozens of times before. As I held him and whispered that he was safe, that I wasn't going anywhere, I realized something important. Even if this all fell apart tomorrow, even if the system took them away and I lost everything I'd worked for, I would never regret opening my door that rainy October night. These children had given me something I'd never had before, a purpose bigger than myself. I just had no idea that 20 years later, they would return that gift in ways I could never have imagined. The point of no return came on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 5 months after I'd taken the kids in. I was getting ready for work when there was a knock at my door. Not the gentle knock of a neighbor or the hurried knock of a delivery person, but the official, authoritative knock that makes your stomach drop before you even see who's there. 2 women in business suits stood on my porch, clipboards in hand, official badges hanging from their necks. Behind them was a police officer, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Ms. Park? I'm Sarah Martinez from Child Protective Services, and this is my colleague, Janet Williams. We need to speak with you about the 3 minors currently residing in your home." My hands went numb. This was the moment I'd been dreading for months, the moment when my makeshift family would be torn apart by bureaucracy and regulations I couldn't fight. "The children are getting ready for school," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can we do this after they leave?" "Actually, we need to speak with the children as well. May we come in?" I had no choice. I stepped aside and let them into my living room, where Lila was helping Danny tie his shoes while Andrew packed his backpack. All 3 kids looked up when the strangers entered, and I watched their faces change from curiosity to fear in seconds. "Kids, these ladies are from Child Services. They just want to ask you some questions. Are you taking us away?" Danny asked, his voice small and scared. We're here to make sure you're safe and being properly cared for, Ms. Martinez said in that practiced, gentle tone that social workers use with frightened children. Can you tell me your full names? And that's when everything fell apart. Lila Morrison, Lila said quietly. Andrew Morrison. Danny Morrison. Ms. Martinez made notes on her clipboard. And how long have you been living with Ms. Park? Since October, Andrew answered. And before that? The kids exchanged glances. I could see them trying to decide how much to reveal, how much truth was safe. We lived with our grandmother, Lila finally said. What was your grandmother's name? Another pause. Rose Morrison. And where did you live with her? On Hawthorne Street. But she died, and we didn't have anywhere else to go. Ms. Martinez was writing everything down, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. No official records. No death certificate for the grandmother. No legal guardianship papers. 3 children who had been living off the grid for months before ending up with me. Miss Park, can we speak privately? I followed her into the kitchen, leaving Janet Williams with the kids and the police officer standing awkwardly by the door. I'm going to be direct with you, Ms. Martinez said. These children have no legal documentation. No birth certificates on file, no school records, no medical records. As far as the state is concerned, they don't exist. They exist, I said firmly. They're right there in my living room, getting ready for school like normal kids. I understand your attachment to them, and I can see they're well cared for. But you have no legal right to these children. You're not a licensed foster parent. You haven't been through background checks or home studies. And most importantly, we have no way to verify that these children are who they say they are or that you have permission to care for them. Permission from who? Their grandmother is dead. They have no other family. That's what they've told you. But without documentation, we have no way to verify any of their story. For all we know, these children could be runaways. They could have parents looking for them. They could be victims of trafficking or abuse. The words hit me like a slap. These children are not being trafficked or abused. Look at them. They're healthy, they're happy, they're doing well in school. I believe you care about them. But the law is clear. These children need to be placed in official foster care while we investigate their background and determine their legal status. And what if you can't find any background? What if there really are no records because they've been living off the grid their whole lives? Then they'll remain in the foster system until suitable permanent placement can be found. Together. Ms. Martinez hesitated. We'll do our best to keep siblings together, but I can't make any guarantees. It depends on available placements. That's when I made the decision that would define the rest of my life. The decision that would cost me everything I'd worked for, but also give me everything I'd never known I wanted. What would it take for me to become their legal guardian? Miss Park, that's a lengthy process. Background checks, home studies, financial evaluations, court proceedings. It could take months, and there's no guarantee you'd be approved. But it's possible? Theoretically, yes. But in the meantime, these children would need to be placed in temporary foster care. I looked through the doorway at Lila, Andrew, and Danny, who were sitting close together on my couch, holding hands and trying not to cry. Danny was clutching the stuffed elephant I'd bought him for Christmas, and Andrew had his arm protectively around his little brother's shoulders. How long do I have? We need to take them today. I'm sorry, but that's protocol. Today? My voice cracked. You're going to rip them away from the only stable home they've had in months, today, with no warning? Miss Park, I understand this is difficult, but these children are not legally in your care. Every day they remain here is another day of illegal placement. I walked back into the living room and knelt down in front of the 3 kids who had become my world. Listen to me, I said, taking their hands. These ladies need to take you to stay somewhere else for a while. But I'm going to fight to bring you home. I'm going to do whatever it takes to make this official, to make us a real family in the eyes of the law. Don't let them split us up, Lila whispered, tears streaming down her face. I won't. I promise you, I will not let them split you up. It was a promise I had no power to keep, but I made it anyway because these children needed to believe that someone was fighting for them. The next hour was the worst of my life. I watched 3 social workers pack up the few belongings my kids had accumulated over 5 months. I watched Danny cling to his stuffed elephant while Andrew tried to be brave and Lila attempted to comfort her brothers even as her own world was falling apart. "We'll be good," Danny whispered to me as they led him to the car. "We'll be really good so they'll let us come home." "You're already good," I told him, hugging him tight. "You're perfect just the way you are." As I watched the car drive away with my children in the back seat, I made a vow that would consume the next 2 years of my life. I would get them back. I would become their legal guardian. I would give them the family and the stability they deserved, no matter what it cost me. I had no idea that the cost would be everything. My savings, my credit, my health, my relationships, my career prospects, my dreams of an easy life. I would spend every penny I had and go into debt I'd never recover from. I would work myself to exhaustion and sacrifice every personal goal I'd ever had. But I also had no idea that those 3 children would grow up to become the kind of people who could save my life 20 years later, or that the love I was about to pour into fighting for them would come back to me in ways I could never have imagined. The legal battle was about to begin, and I was about to learn just how much a person could sacrifice for love. The next 18 months became a masterclass in how the system can break you down piece by piece, even when you're trying to do the right thing. I hired a lawyer I couldn't afford with money I didn't have. Patricia Valdez was a family law attorney who specialized in custody cases, and she was brutally honest about my chances from our first meeting. "The state has placed these children in 3 different foster homes," she told me, spreading the case files across her desk. "Lila is with a family in Beaverton, Andrew is in Gresham, and Danny is in a group home in Southeast Portland." My heart shattered. They promised they'd try to keep them together. They tried. But there aren't many foster families willing to take 3 children at once, especially children with no documentation or background history. I was visiting each of them twice a week, the maximum allowed under the supervised visitation rules. Watching my children adapt to their new situations was like watching them slowly disappear. Lila was withdrawn and angry, barely speaking during our visits. Andrew threw himself into his schoolwork with an intensity that worried me. And Danny, sweet Danny, had started wetting the bed again and having nightmares. "When are we coming home?" he asked me every single visit. "Soon," I would tell him, though I was beginning to wonder if it was a lie. The legal process was a nightmare of bureaucracy and delays. Background checks that took months to process. Home studies that required modifications to my house I couldn't afford. Financial evaluations that revealed exactly how much debt I'd accumulated trying to care for 3 children on a nurse's salary. "Your debt-to-income ratio is concerning," the social worker conducting my evaluation noted. "How do you plan to provide financial stability for 3 children when you're already struggling financially?" "I'll work more shifts. I'll get a second job if I have to." "Miss Park, these children need stability, not a guardian who's working herself to death trying to make ends meet." But I was already working myself to death. I'd picked up a weekend job at a private clinic, and I was covering extra shifts at the hospital whenever possible. I was surviving on 4 hours of sleep a night and living on coffee and whatever cheap food I could grab between shifts. My health was deteriorating, but I couldn't afford to slow down. Every dollar I earned went toward legal fees, court costs, and the modifications required to make my home suitable for 3 children according to state standards. The worst part was watching the kids change during our visits. Lila's foster family was nice enough, but they had 4 other foster children, and she was getting lost in the shuffle. Andrew's placement was with an older couple who meant well, but didn't understand his need for intellectual stimulation. And Danny's group home was overcrowded and understaffed. I hated there, Danny whispered to me during one visit when the social worker stepped out of the room. The other kids are mean, and nobody reads me stories at bedtime. I know, sweetheart. I'm working as hard as I can to bring you home. Promise? I promise. But the promises were getting harder to make as the obstacles kept mounting. The state had hired investigators to try to verify the children's background, and they'd found nothing. No records of Rose Morrison. No death certificate. No previous addresses that could be confirmed. It was as if the children's entire history before they showed up on my doorstep was a fabrication. This is highly unusual, Ms. Martinez told me during one of our monthly check-ins. Children don't just appear out of nowhere with no documentation. We're beginning to wonder if these children have been coached to tell a false story. Coached by who? Me? I found them on my porch, remember? We're exploring all possibilities, Miss Park. The implication was clear. They thought I was somehow involved in whatever had happened to these children before they came to me. They thought I might be part of some larger scheme, that I might have kidnapped them or helped someone else hide them. The paranoia was suffocating. Every interaction with social workers felt like an interrogation. Every visit with the children was monitored and documented. Every aspect of my life was under scrutiny, from my work schedule to my dating life to my mental health. Have you considered that maybe this isn't meant to be? My sister Jennifer asked during one of our increasingly strained phone conversations. Maybe the universe is trying to tell you something. You've lost Alex, you're drowning in debt, you're working yourself sick, and for what? 3 kids who might not even be who they say they are. They're exactly who they say they are. They're Lila, Andrew, and Danny, and they need me. Maggie, you're destroying your life for children who were never yours to begin with. But they felt like mine. Every fiber of my being told me these were my children, that I was meant to be their mother, that this family we'd created in those 5 short months was real and worth fighting for. The breakthrough came in month 14 of the legal battle, but it wasn't the kind of breakthrough I'd been hoping for. We found something, Patricia told me, her voice carefully neutral. The investigators located a record of Rose Morrison's death. She died in a nursing home in Salem, Oregon, 6 months before the children showed up at your house. My blood ran cold. That's impossible. The kids said she died 6 months before I found them, which would be 4 months after this record says she died. I know. Which means either the children have been lying about their timeline, or someone else was caring for them during those missing months. Someone else. Someone who might have a legal claim to these children. Someone who might be looking for them. The implications hit me like a freight train. If there was someone else out there with a legal claim to Lila, Andrew, and Danny, someone who had been caring for them after their grandmother died, then my entire case would collapse. I would lose them forever, and they might be returned to a situation I knew nothing about. What do? We keep fighting. But Maggie, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that these children might not be legally available for adoption. If there's a biological relative out there, or if someone else has a prior claim. She didn't need to finish the sentence. I knew what she was saying. After 18 months of fighting, after sacrificing everything I had, after going into debt that would take me decades to recover from, I might lose them anyway. That night, I sat in my empty house, surrounded by the modifications I'd made for children who might never come home. The bunk beds I'd bought and assembled myself. The study area I'd created in the living room. The family photos I'd hung on the walls, pictures of the 5 months when we'd been happy and whole and together. I thought about giving up. The rational part of my brain told me Jennifer was right, that I was destroying my life for a battle I might not be able to win. I could walk away, let the system handle it, try to rebuild what was left of my own life. But then I remembered Danny's face during our last visit, the way he'd clung to me when it was time to say goodbye. I remembered Andrew showing me a story he'd written about a family that gets separated, but finds their way back to each other. I remembered Lila whispering, "I love you, Maggie," during one of our phone calls. These children had already lost everyone they'd ever loved. I couldn't be another person who abandoned them, even if fighting for them cost me everything. I picked up the phone and called Patricia. Whatever it takes, I told her. I don't care how much it costs or how long it takes. We're bringing my children home. I had no idea that the missing months in their timeline would turn out to be the key to everything. I had no idea that someone had been protecting these children long before I ever met them, or that the secret they were keeping would one day save my life. All I knew was that I loved 3 children who needed me, and I would fight for them until I had nothing left to give. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday in September, exactly 22 months after the children had been taken from my home. I was working a double shift at the hospital when my phone buzzed with Patricia's number. "Maggie, I need you to sit down." My stomach dropped. Late-night calls from lawyers were never good news. "We found him. We found the person who had the children during those missing months." "Who?" "His name is Dr. James Morrison. He's a retired physician living in Seattle. And Maggie, he's their grandfather." The words didn't make sense at first. "That's impossible. The kids said they didn't have any other family." They lied. Or more accurately, they were told to lie. Dr. Morrison has been looking for them for over 2 years. He filed a missing persons report when they disappeared from his care. I felt like the floor was falling out from under me. His care? After Rose Morrison died, the children went to live with her son, James. He's their father's father. He had legal guardianship, Maggie. Official, court-ordered guardianship. Then why were they on the streets? Why were they homeless? Patricia's silence stretched too long. That's where it gets complicated. Dr. Morrison says the children ran away from his home in Seattle. He's been searching for them ever since. Ran away? Lila, Andrew, and Danny aren't runaways. They're good kids. They wouldn't just run away from a safe home. According to Dr. Morrison, they were having trouble adjusting after their grandmother's death. He says they were acting out, refusing to follow rules, and one night they just disappeared. Nothing about this made sense. The children I knew were responsible, caring, mature beyond their years. They weren't troublemakers or runaways. I want to talk to him. Maggie, that's not a good idea. He's already filed paperwork to regain custody. His lawyer is arguing that you've been harboring runaway children for over 2 years. Harboring? I saved them. They were homeless and scared, and I gave them a home. I know that. But legally, if Dr. Morrison had guardianship and the children ran away, then technically. Technically what? Technically, you could be charged with kidnapping. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. Kidnapping. After everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd given up, everything I'd fought for, they were going to charge me with kidnapping the children I loved more than my own life. I picked up the phone with shaking hands. What happens now? Dr. Morrison is flying down tomorrow. There's going to be a hearing next week to determine custody. Maggie, I have to be honest with you. If he has legal guardianship papers and can prove the children ran away from his care, we don't have a case. What about what the children want? Don't they get a say? They're minors. And given that they've been living under false pretenses for over 2 years, the court isn't likely to give much weight to their preferences. After I hung up, I sat in the hospital break room and tried to process what I'd just learned. Everything I thought I knew about Lila, Andrew, and Danny was built on lies. They weren't orphans with nowhere to go. They had a grandfather who wanted them, who had been looking for them, who had legal rights to them. But if that was true, why had they run away? Why had they been so terrified of being separated? Why had they never mentioned having a grandfather in Seattle? The next day, I met Dr. James Morrison for the first time, and I understood immediately why the children had run. He was a tall, imposing man in his 70s, with silver hair and cold blue eyes. He wore an expensive suit and carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. When he spoke, his voice was clipped and precise. Ms. Park, I want to thank you for caring for my grandchildren during their episode. I'm sure you meant well, but they belong with family. They told me they didn't have any family. Children say many things when they're upset. Lila, Andrew, and Daniel have been through significant trauma. They lost their parents, then their grandmother. When they came to live with me, they were angry and acting out. Running away was their way of expressing that anger. They weren't angry when I knew them. They were loving, responsible, mature children. I'm sure they were on their best behavior with you. Children can be very manipulative when they want something. The way he said it, so dismissive and cold, made my skin crawl. These weren't manipulative children. They were survivors who had learned to adapt to whatever situation they found themselves in. Dr. Morrison, can I ask why you think they ran away? His expression hardened. They were having difficulty adjusting to structure and discipline. I run an orderly household, Ms. Park. I believe children need rules, consequences, and clear expectations. My grandchildren had been allowed to run wild with their grandmother, and they resented my attempts to provide proper guidance. What kind of guidance? Scheduled meals, bedtimes, study hours. Consequences for misbehavior. Basic parenting, Ms. Park. But something in his tone suggested it was more than basic parenting. Something in the way he talked about the children, like they were problems to be managed rather than people to be loved, made me understand why 3 kids would choose homelessness over living with him. The hearing was a nightmare. Dr. Morrison's lawyer presented a compelling case. Legal guardianship papers. Financial stability. A clean background check. A stable home environment. Medical records showing he'd taken the children for regular checkups and maintained their health insurance. My lawyer tried to argue that the children's preferences should be considered, that they had thrived in my care, that separating them now would cause additional trauma. But when the judge asked to speak with Lila, Andrew, and Danny privately, they came back to the courtroom looking defeated and scared. Your Honor, Lila said when asked to speak, we want to stay with Maggie. She's our family now. I understand that, young lady. But Dr. Morrison is your legal guardian, and he's your grandfather. Family takes care of family. But he's not. Andrew started to say something, then stopped and looked at Dr. Morrison, who was staring at him with those cold blue eyes. He's not what, son? The judge asked gently. Nothing, Your Honor. Never mind. I watched my children shut down in real time, watched them retreat into themselves the way they had when I first found them. Whatever they wanted to say about Dr. Morrison, they were too afraid to say it. The judge's ruling was swift and final. Dr. Morrison would regain custody of his grandchildren immediately. I would be allowed supervised visits for the next month to help with the transition, and then all contact would cease. Furthermore, the judge continued, while I don't believe Ms. Park acted with malicious intent, harboring runaway minors is a serious matter. I'm ordering a full investigation into how these children remained hidden from their legal guardian for over 2 years. As they led my children away, Danny broke free and ran back to me. Don't forget us, he whispered, throwing his arms around my waist. Please don't forget us. Never, I promised, holding him tight. I will never forget you. Dr. Morrison pulled Danny away from me with more force than necessary. That's enough. Say goodbye, Daniel. As I watched them walk out of the courtroom, Lila looked back at me one last time. Her lips moved silently, and I could read what she was saying. Help us. But there was nothing I could do. I had no legal rights, no standing, no power to help them. I had spent everything I had fighting for children who were never legally mine to begin with. That night, I sat in my empty house surrounded by the remnants of the family I'd lost. The bunk beds that would never be slept in again. The study area where no one would do homework. The family photos that were now just pictures of strangers. I had lost everything. My savings, my credit, my health, my relationships, my dreams. And for what? For 22 months of loving 3 children who had been taken away from me as suddenly as they'd appeared. But the worst part wasn't the financial ruin or the legal troubles or even the loneliness. The worst part was knowing that somewhere in Seattle, 3 children I loved were living with a man who saw them as burdens to be managed rather than people to be cherished. I had no idea that those children were already planning their escape. I had no idea that the love I'd shown them had given them the strength to survive whatever was waiting for them. And I had no idea that 20 years later, they would return to save my life in ways I could never have imagined. All I knew was that I had failed them when they needed me most, and I would carry that failure with me for the rest of my life. The investigation into my harboring of runaway minors began 3 weeks after the custody hearing. Detective Sarah Kim from the Portland Police Bureau sat across from me in my living room, asking questions that made me feel like a criminal. Ms. Park, when the children first appeared at your home, did you make any attempt to locate their family? They told me they didn't have any family. Their grandmother had died, and they had nowhere else to go. But you didn't contact authorities to verify this information? I should have. I know that now. But they were scared and hungry, and I was trying to help them. For over 2 years? The way she said it made those 2 years sound like a crime instead of the most meaningful period of my life. The investigation dragged on for months. They interviewed my coworkers, my neighbors, anyone who had known about the children. They went through my financial records, looking for evidence that I had somehow profited from keeping the children hidden. They questioned my mental health, my motivations, my fitness to work with vulnerable populations. The worst part was that I couldn't defend myself without betraying the children's trust. I couldn't tell the investigators about the fear I'd seen in their eyes when Dr. Morrison took them away, or the way Danny had whispered, "Help us," as they left the courtroom. I couldn't explain that something about their grandfather felt wrong, that his coldness toward them had made my skin crawl. Because officially, Dr. Morrison was the victim in the story. He was the grieving grandfather who had lost his grandchildren to a well-meaning but misguided woman who had kept them from him for over 2 years. The supervised visits ended after a month, just as the judge had ordered. My last conversation with Lila, Andrew, and Danny took place in a sterile conference room at the Department of Human Services, with a social worker taking notes on everything we said. "Are you okay?" I asked them, trying to read their faces for signs of how they were really doing. "We're fine," Lila said, but her voice was flat and emotionless. "Grandfather takes good care of us. We have our own rooms," Andrew added. "And we go to a good school." Danny said nothing. He just sat close to his siblings and stared at his hands. "I miss you," I told them, not caring that the social worker was writing it down. "I think about you every day." "We miss you too," Lila whispered, then glanced nervously at the social worker. "But we're where we belong now. With family." The words sounded rehearsed, like something they'd been told to say. But I couldn't push them for the truth, not with a social worker monitoring our every word. When it was time to say goodbye, Danny finally looked up at me. His eyes were different than I remembered. Older. Sadder. More guarded. "Thank you for taking care of us," he said formally, like he was reading from a script. "It was my privilege," I told him. "You 3 are the best thing that ever happened to me." As they walked away, I noticed that none of them looked back. Not once. The financial devastation was complete. I had spent my entire retirement account on legal fees. My credit cards were maxed out. I had taken out a second mortgage on my house to pay for the home modifications required by the state. The weekend job at the private clinic had ended when the investigation began, because they couldn't risk employing someone under scrutiny for child endangerment. I was working 60-hour weeks at the hospital just to keep my house, but it wasn't enough. The bills kept piling up. The debt kept growing. The stress was eating me alive. My health began to fail in ways I couldn't ignore. I was having chest pains, headaches, dizzy spells. I was losing weight because I couldn't afford to eat properly and was too exhausted to cook. I was surviving on coffee and whatever free food I could find in the hospital break room. Maggie, you look terrible, my supervisor, Linda, told me one day. When's the last time you took a vacation? Or even a sick day? I can't afford to take time off. You can't afford not to. You're going to collapse if you keep this up. But I couldn't stop. Stopping meant losing my house, and my house was the only thing I had left that connected me to the children. It was where we'd been a family, where they'd done homework at the kitchen table and watched movies on Friday nights and felt safe for the first time in months. The investigation concluded 8 months later with a finding of poor judgment but no criminal intent. I wouldn't be charged with kidnapping, but the report would remain on my record permanently. Any future background checks would show that I had been investigated for harboring runaway minors. You're lucky, Detective Kim told me when she delivered the news. Dr. Morrison could have pushed for charges, but he chose not to. He said he believes you genuinely thought you were helping the children. Lucky. I had lost everything I cared about, destroyed my financial future, and been branded as someone who exercised poor judgment with children, but I was lucky because I wasn't going to prison. The isolation was the worst part. Jennifer had stopped calling months ago, tired of my obsession with children who were no longer part of my life. Alex had married his coworker and moved to California. My few close friends had grown uncomfortable with the investigation and the constant drama surrounding my situation. I was completely alone for the first time in my adult life, rattling around in a house that felt like a mausoleum of broken dreams. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in March, exactly 3 years after the children had been taken from me. I was working a night shift when I got a call from my mortgage company. Despite working every available hour, despite sacrificing everything else in my life, I was 3 months behind on my payments. Miss Park, we need to discuss your options. We can work out a payment plan, but you need to bring your account current within 30 days or we'll have to begin foreclosure proceedings. I hung up the phone and sat in the hospital break room, staring at the numbers on my bank statement. Even if I worked every single shift available for the next month, I wouldn't have enough money to catch up on my mortgage payments. I was going to lose my house. The last physical reminder of the family I'd loved and lost was going to be taken away from me too. That night, I drove home through the empty streets of Portland and sat in my driveway, looking at the house where I'd been happiest. The garden I'd planted with the children was overgrown and dying. The swing set I'd bought for Danny was rusted and broken. The windows that had once glowed with warmth and laughter were dark and cold. I thought about giving up entirely. What was the point of fighting anymore? The children were gone. My savings were gone. My health was failing. My relationships were destroyed. I was 51 years old with nothing to show for my life except debt and regret. I could sell the house, declare bankruptcy, move somewhere cheap, and start over. I could try to rebuild some semblance of a normal life, maybe even find someone to share it with. I could stop carrying the weight of a family that had never really been mine to begin with. But as I sat there in the darkness, I remembered something Danny had said during one of our last visits. He'd been talking about a book he was reading, and he looked up at me with those serious dark eyes and said, "Sometimes people have to wait a really long time for their happy ending, but that doesn't mean it's not coming." I didn't know if my happy ending was coming. I didn't even know what it would look like anymore. But I knew that giving up wasn't the answer. Somewhere out there, 3 children I loved were living with a man who saw them as burdens instead of blessings. Even if I couldn't help them now, even if I never saw them again, I could honor the love we'd shared by refusing to let it destroy me. I would find a way to keep my house. I would find a way to survive. And maybe, someday, if Lila, Andrew, and Danny ever needed me again, I would still be here. I had no idea that they were already planning to need me. I had no idea that the love I'd given them was growing into something powerful enough to change all our lives. And I had no idea that in 20 years, they would return to save me in ways I could never have imagined. All I knew was that love doesn't end just because the people you love are taken away from you. Sometimes love is about holding on when everything else tells you to let go. The turning point came from the most unexpected source, a letter that arrived on a rainy Thursday morning in November, for years after I'd lost the children. I almost threw it away, thinking it was another bill or legal notice, but something about the careful handwriting on the envelope made me pause. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just a few lines. Dear Maggie, we think about you every day. We're okay, but we miss our real family. Don't give up on us. Love always, L, M, and D. There was no return address, no postmark I could read clearly, but I knew immediately it was from them. The handwriting was Lila's, but I could see Andrew's careful editing in the precise word choices, and Danny's influence in the simple, heartfelt message. They remembered me. After 4 years of silence, they still considered me family. They were telling me not to give up, which meant they hadn't given up either. I held that letter and cried harder than I had since the day they were taken away. But these weren't tears of grief anymore. They were tears of hope. The letter changed everything. I stopped seeing my struggles as pointless suffering and started seeing them as preparation for whatever was coming next. If my children needed me to not give up, then I wouldn't give up. I found a financial counselor who helped me restructure my debt and create a payment plan that would let me keep my house. I took on a third job, working weekends at an urgent care clinic. I sold everything I didn't absolutely need and moved into just the main bedroom and kitchen of my house, renting out the other rooms to nursing students who needed affordable housing. Slowly, painfully, I began to rebuild. Not the life I'd had before, but something new. Something sustainable. Something that could weather whatever storms were coming. The second letter arrived 2 years later on my 55th birthday. This one was longer. Dear Maggie, happy birthday. We hope you're taking care of yourself. We're all in college now. Lila is studying music, Andrew is studying law, and Danny is studying medicine. We learned about taking care of people from you. We're going to make you proud someday. We promise. All our love, L, M, and D. College. My children were in college, pursuing careers that would let them help other people. Despite everything they'd been through, despite being raised by a man who saw them as burdens, they had grown into young adults who wanted to make a difference in the world. I framed that letter and hung it next to my bed, where I could see it every morning when I woke up and every night before I went to sleep. The third letter came when I was 57. Dear Maggie, we graduated. All of us. We're starting our careers now, but we haven't forgotten where we learned what really matters. Thank you for showing us what love looks like. We're going to find a way to come home someday. Wait for us. Love always, L, M, and D. Come home. They still thought of my house as home, even after all these years. They were planning to come back somehow someday. But as the years passed and no more letters came, I began to wonder if I'd been holding on to false hope. Maybe they'd moved on with their lives. Maybe they'd found happiness with Dr. Morrison after all. Maybe the letters had been their way of saying goodbye, not hello. My health began to decline in my late 50s. The years of stress, overwork, and financial struggle had taken their toll. I was having kidney problems, high blood pressure, chronic fatigue. My doctor kept telling me to slow down, to reduce my stress, to take better care of myself. But I couldn't slow down. I was still paying off the debt from the legal battle. I was still working multiple jobs to keep my house. I was still holding on to the hope that someday my children would need a place to come home to. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 20 years after I'd first found 3 scared children on my porch. Stage 4 kidney disease. My kidneys were failing, and without a transplant, I had maybe 6 months to live. Do you have family who could be tested as potential donors? Dr. Patterson asked gently. No, I said automatically. No family. But even as I said it, I thought about Lila, Andrew, and Danny. They were my family, even if the law had never recognized it. They were the only family I'd ever really wanted. What about friends? Sometimes friends are willing to be tested. I looked around my life and realized how isolated I'd become. The nursing students who rented rooms from me were polite but distant. My coworkers were friendly but not close. I'd spent so many years focused on survival that I'd forgotten how to build real relationships. "I'll think about it," I told him, but we both knew I was lying. That night, I sat in my kitchen and wrote 3 letters. One to Lila, one to Andrew, one to Danny. I told them about my diagnosis. I told them how proud I was of what they'd accomplished. I told them that loving them had been the greatest privilege of my life, and that even if I never saw them again, they had given my life meaning and purpose. I told them not to feel guilty or responsible. I told them to live their lives fully and love deeply and remember that they were worthy of every good thing that came their way. I sealed the letters and put them in my desk drawer. I couldn't send them because I didn't know where they were, and I wasn't sure I should burden them with my problems anyway. They had their own lives now, their own families and careers and futures. But writing the letters helped me make peace with what was coming. I had loved deeply and been loved in return, even if it was only for a brief time. I had made a difference in 3 young lives, and they had made a difference in mine. That was enough. That had to be enough. I made arrangements for my funeral, updated my will to leave my house to a charity that helped homeless children, and prepared to face whatever time I had left with as much grace as I could manage. I had no idea that my children had been watching over me all these years. I had no idea that they had become powerful enough to move mountains, or that they were already putting plans in motion to save my life. I had no idea that the love I'd given them 20 years ago was about to come back to me in ways I could never have imagined. All I knew was that I was ready to let go if that's what was required. But I was also ready to hold on if there was still hope to be found. The choice between giving up and holding on had defined my entire adult life. Now, facing my final chapter, I chose hope one more time. I chose to believe that love never really ends, it just changes form. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it comes back to save you when you need it most. The 3 strangers in expensive suits weren't strangers at all. "Hello, Maggie," the younger man said again, and this time I heard it. The voice was deeper, more confident, but underneath the polish and authority was the same gentle tone that used to ask me to read just one more bedtime story. "Danny?" I whispered. He smiled, and suddenly I could see the 8-year-old boy who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms. "It's Dr. Daniel Morrison now, actually. But yes, it's me." The woman with steel gray eyes stepped forward. "I'm Dr. Lila Morrison Park. I kept your name, Maggie. I hope you don't mind." My heart stopped. She'd kept my name. After all these years, after everything that had happened, she'd kept my name. The 3rd man, the one who'd been reading from the tablet, cleared his throat. "Andrew Morrison, attorney at law. We've been looking for you for a very long time." I tried to sit up in the hospital bed, but the dialysis had left me weak and dizzy. "I don't understand. How did you find me? How did you know I was here?" "We never lost track of you," Lila said softly. "We've been watching over you for 20 years, Maggie. We just couldn't contact you directly until now." "Watching over me?" Danny pulled a chair closer to my bed and sat down. "Do you remember Dr. Morrison? Our grandfather." "Of course. He took you away from me." "He wasn't our grandfather," Andrew said quietly. "He wasn't even related to us." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "His real name was Dr. James Whitfield," Lila explained. "He was a pediatrician who had lost his medical license for inappropriate conduct with young patients. He'd been running an illegal adoption ring, taking children with no documentation and selling them to wealthy families who didn't want to go through official channels." My mind reeled. "But the legal papers, the guardianship documents, all forged," Andrew said. "Very well done, but forged." He'd been doing it for years, targeting children who had fallen through the cracks of the system. Children like us, who had no official records, no one looking for them. But why did you go with him? Why didn't you tell someone? Danny's face darkened. Because he threatened to kill you if we didn't cooperate. He said he had people watching you, and if we ever tried to contact you or tell anyone the truth, you would have an accident. The room spun around me. He threatened to kill me? He showed us pictures of your house, your car, your route to work, Lila said, her voice tight with old anger. He knew everything about your life. He said you were already under investigation for kidnapping, and it would be very easy to make you disappear and blame it on someone seeking revenge. So you protected me by staying away. We protected you by playing along, Andrew corrected. We went to live with him, we followed his rules, we kept our mouths shut. But we were planning our escape from day one. It took us 3 years, Danny continued. 3 years of pretending to be grateful, of acting like the perfect grandchildren, while we gathered evidence and planned our move. What kind of evidence? Lila reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Financial records showing payments from adoptive families. Forged documents with his real signature. Recordings of phone conversations where he discussed selling children. And most importantly, the real story of who we are. She handed me a photograph and I gasped. It showed 3 children who looked exactly like Lila, Andrew, and Danny, but the photo was dated 1987, years before they were born. Those are our parents, Andrew explained. Dr. Sarah Park and Dr. Michael Morrison. They were both physicians working for Doctors Without Borders. Park, I whispered. Your cousin, Lila said gently. Sarah Park was your father's brother's daughter. You met her once at a family reunion when you were teenagers, but you probably don't remember. The world tilted on its axis. You're my family? My actual family? When our parents were killed in that car accident, we were supposed to go to you, Danny said. Sarah had named you as our guardian in her will. But the paperwork got lost in the system, and we ended up with our grandmother instead. And when she died, Whitfield intercepted us before the authorities could locate you, Andrew added. He'd been monitoring the system for children exactly like us. Orphans with no clear paper trail, no one actively looking for them. But how did you find out about me? We never stopped looking, Lila said. Even when we were children, we knew something wasn't right about our situation. We remembered our mother talking about her cousin Maggie, who was a nurse, who had such a big heart. When we escaped from Whitfield, the first thing we did was try to find you. But by then, you'd already found us, Danny said with a smile. You'd already taken us in, already loved us, already fought for us. You were doing exactly what our mother would have wanted you to do. I was crying now, ugly sobs that shook my whole body. I failed you. I let them take you away. I couldn't protect you. You saved us, Andrew said firmly. Those 5 months with you showed us what love looked like. What family felt like. It gave us the strength to survive 3 years with Whitfield and the motivation to build the lives we have now. What lives? I asked, wiping my eyes. I'm the chief of pediatric surgery at Seattle Children's Hospital, Danny said. I specialize in kidney transplants. I'm a federal prosecutor, Andrew added. I've spent the last 10 years building cases against people who exploit children. Whitfield was my first conviction. And I'm a trauma surgeon and the director of a foundation that provides medical care to homeless children, Lila said. We've helped over 10,000 kids in the last 5 years. I stared at them, these 3 accomplished adults who had grown from the scared children I'd loved and lost. You're all doctors and lawyers. We're all people who learned about service and sacrifice from you, Lila corrected. Everything we've accomplished, we owe to those 5 months when you showed us what it meant to be loved unconditionally. But why now? Why are you here now? Danny leaned forward and took my hand. Because you need a kidney transplant, and I'm a perfect match. The words didn't register at first. What? I've been monitoring your medical records for years, He said gently. When your kidney function started declining, I had myself tested. We share the same rare blood type, and I'm a perfect genetic match for transplant. You can't give me your kidney. You're a surgeon. You need both your kidneys. I need one kidney, he corrected. And I need my family more than I need a spare organ. But the risks are minimal, Lila interjected. I'll be performing the surgery myself, along with the best transplant team in the country. We've already cleared our schedules, arranged for the best possible care, and prepared for every contingency. And I've taken care of all the legal aspects, Andrew added. Medical power of attorney, insurance authorizations, everything. We're not letting bureaucracy get in the way this time. I looked at these three incredible people who had somehow grown from the broken children I'd found on my porch 20 years ago. I don't understand. How is this possible? How are you here? Because you taught us that family isn't about blood or legal papers, Danny said. It's about love and sacrifice and showing up when someone needs you. Because you showed us that sometimes the most important thing you can do is open your door to someone who has nowhere else to go, Lila added. And because we made a promise 20 years ago that we would take care of each other, Andrew finished. That includes you, Maggie. It's always included you. As I lay there looking at my children, my family, my miracle, I finally understood what Danny had meant all those years ago about happy endings taking a long time to arrive. Sometimes love plants seeds that take decades to bloom. Sometimes the family you choose becomes the family that saves your life. And sometimes, when you think you've lost everything, the universe gives you back more than you ever dared to hope for. When do we do the surgery? I asked. Tomorrow morning, Danny said. If you're ready. I've been ready for 20 years, I told him. I've been ready since the day I opened my door and found my family waiting for me. The surgery took place on a crisp December morning, exactly 20 years and 2 months after I'd first found 3 scared children on my porch. As they wheeled me into the operating room, I saw Lila scrubbed and ready, her eyes focused and determined above her surgical mask. See you on the other side, Maggie, she said, and I heard both the accomplished surgeon and the 12-year-old girl who used to sing me to sleep when I was stressed about work. When I woke up 6 hours later, Danny was sitting beside my bed, looking tired but smiling. How do you feel? I took inventory of my body. The pain was manageable, but more importantly, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Energy. The fog that had been clouding my thoughts for months was already starting to lift. I feel like I might actually have a future again. You do, he said, squeezing my hand. We all do. The recovery was long but filled with joy in ways I'd never expected. Andrew had arranged for extended medical leave from my job, with full pay and benefits. Lila had coordinated with the best rehabilitation specialists in the country. And Danny, despite having just donated a kidney, was back to work within 2 weeks, checking on me between his own surgeries. But the most amazing part was watching them work together. They moved around each other with the easy familiarity of people who had never really been apart, finishing each other's sentences, anticipating each other's needs, functioning as the family unit they'd always been meant to be. We stayed in touch, Lila told me during one of my follow-up appointments. After we escaped from Whitfield, we made sure we all ended up in the same city. We've had dinner together every Sunday for the last 15 years. And we talked about you every single time, Andrew added. Wondering how you were, whether you were happy, whether you'd found someone to love who loved you back. We wanted to contact you sooner, Danny said. But we had to be careful. Whitfield had connections, people who might have hurt you if they knew we were back in your life. It wasn't until Andrew finally got him convicted and sent to prison that we felt safe enough to reach out. How long has he been in prison? 5 years, Andrew said with satisfaction. 25 to life for child trafficking, fraud, and a dozen other charges. He'll never hurt another child. As my strength returned, they began to share more of their lives with me. Danny was engaged to a fellow surgeon named Maria, a brilliant woman who specialized in pediatric cardiology. They were planning a small wedding in the spring, and they wanted me to walk Danny down the aisle. Maria's been hearing about you for 3 years, Danny said. She's excited to finally meet the woman who raised the man she fell in love with. Andrew had recently been promoted to lead a new federal task force focused on crimes against children. He was also dating someone, a social worker named James who worked with homeless youth. He reminds me of you, actually, Andrew said. He sees kids that everyone else has given up on, and he refuses to let them fall through the cracks. And Lila, brilliant Lila, had not only become one of the most respected trauma surgeons on the West Coast, but had also started a foundation that provided free medical care to homeless children and families. We call it the Maggie Park Foundation, she said, showing me the website on her tablet. We've opened clinics in 12 cities so far, and we're planning to expand to 20 more next year. I stared at the screen, at the logo that incorporated my name, at the mission statement that talked about providing care and dignity to society's most vulnerable children. You named it after me? You're the one who taught us that every child deserves love and safety, regardless of their circumstances, she said. Everything we do is built on the foundation you gave us. 6 months after the surgery, I was strong enough to travel. The first place they took me was to Danny's wedding, a beautiful ceremony in a garden overlooking Puget Sound. As I walked him down the aisle, I thought about the scared 8-year-old boy who used to have nightmares and marveled at the confident, compassionate man he'd become. Maria welcomed me into their family with open arms, and I gained not just a daughter-in-law, but a friend who understood the unique bond one shared with my children. Danny told me you saved his life, she said during the reception. But he also told me he's returning the favor. I think that's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. The second trip was to Washington, D.C., where Andrew was receiving a commendation for his work on child trafficking cases. Watching him accept the award, listening to him speak about the importance of protecting vulnerable children, I felt a pride so deep it took my breath away. This award belongs to someone else, he said during his acceptance speech. To a woman who taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is open your door to someone who needs help. Maggie Park, this is for you. The third trip was to the opening of a new clinic in Portland, the 20th location for the Maggie Park Foundation. Lila had arranged for it to be just a few miles from my house, in the neighborhood where I'd first found them. We wanted to bring the work home, she explained as we toured the bright, welcoming space that would provide free medical care to homeless children and families. This is where it all started, where we learned what it meant to be loved. As we stood in the main treatment room, surrounded by cheerful murals and state-of-the-art medical equipment, I thought about the journey that had brought us all to this moment. The scared children who had appeared on my porch. The legal battle that had nearly destroyed me. The years of separation and silence. The diagnosis that had seemed like a death sentence. All of it had led to this, a family reunited, lives saved and transformed, and a legacy of love that would help thousands of children for generations to come. I have something for you, Lila said, handing me a small wrapped package. Inside was a keyring with 3 keys and a small plaque that read, "Home is wherever your family is." The first key is to Danny and Maria's house in Seattle, she explained. The second is to Andrew and James's place in D.C. And the third is to my house here in Portland. You all have homes here now? We all have homes wherever you are, Andrew corrected. But yes, we've all moved back to Portland. We want to be close to you and to the work we're doing here. Besides, Danny added with a grin, someone needs to make sure you're taking your anti-rejection medications and not working too many shifts at the hospital. Speaking of which, Lila said, we have a proposition for you. They wanted me to come work for the foundation, using my experience as a pediatric nurse to help design programs and train staff. It would mean leaving the hospital where I'd worked for over 20 years, But it would also mean working alongside my children to help vulnerable kids in ways I'd never imagined possible. Think about it, Andrew said. You could help us expand the foundation, make sure every clinic operates with the same love and compassion you showed us. You could train other nurses and doctors to see homeless children as people worthy of dignity and care, Lila added. And you could help us make sure no child ever has to sleep on a stranger's porch because they have nowhere else to go, Danny finished. As I looked at these three incredible adults who had grown from the broken children I'd loved and lost and found again, I realized that my story wasn't ending. It was just beginning a new chapter. When do I start? I asked. The celebration that followed was everything I'd ever dreamed of but never dared to hope for. My children, my family, my miracle, surrounding me with love and laughter and plans for a future I'd thought I'd lost forever. That night, as I sat in my garden with Lila, Andrew, and Danny, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, I thought about the letter Danny had written me all those years ago, about happy endings taking a long time to arrive. He'd been right. Sometimes the most beautiful endings are the ones that feel like beginnings. Sometimes the family you lose comes back stronger than ever. And sometimes, when you think your story is over, the universe gives you a whole new book to write. Thank you, I said to them, to the evening air, to whatever force had brought us all back together. Thank you for what? Lila asked. For coming home. For saving my life. For becoming the incredible people you were always meant to be. Thank you for opening your door, Andrew replied. For showing us what love looks like. For never giving up on us, even when we couldn't contact you. Thank you for teaching us that family isn't about blood or legal papers, Danny added. It's about showing up when someone needs you. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I felt a peace I'd never experienced before. My children were home. My health was restored. My future was bright with possibility. And somewhere out there, in cities across the country, clinics bearing my name were providing care and hope to children who needed both. The love I'd given to three scared kids on a rainy October night had multiplied and spread, touching thousands of lives in ways I was only beginning to understand. Hey, how are you all doing out there? I hope this story has touched your heart the way these three incredible people touched mine. If it has, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear about the power of love and family and never giving up hope. Because here's what I've learned. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is open your door to someone who needs help. Sometimes the family you choose becomes the family that saves your life. And sometimes, when you think you've lost everything, love finds a way to bring you home. The Maggie Park Foundation is still growing, still helping children, still proving that one person's kindness can change the world. And my family, my beautiful, brilliant, miraculous family, continues to show me every day that love never really ends. It just gets stronger. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for believing in the power of love to transform lives. And remember, your own happy ending might be just around the corner, waiting for you to open the door and let it in. Until next time, keep your hearts open and your doors unlocked. You never know what miracles might be waiting on your porch.